You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Lori Rader-Day.
At the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War. This audio clip is narrated by the one and only Luke Daniels. You're going to love this series. I love it so much. And Richard has been a great supporter and sponsor of the show, and we're going to show him some love. Listen to the audiobook excerpt. You're going to love it. And be sure to go to audible.com to purchase it. If you're not an Audible subscriber, you can get a free book just by signing up for a free trial at audibletrial.com/Hank. You get a 30-day free trial. You get the free book. If you decide to cancel your Audible subscription, you get to keep the free book, and it doesn't cost you a single penny. audibletrial.com/Hank, and listen after the show for the clip from Richard Fox.
Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories, Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Who Wants to Love a Billionaire? Billionaires in New York, Book 1 by Laura Burton. Do you have a favorite writer whose books are auto-buys for you? Wouldn't you love for readers to have you on their auto-buy list, then recommend your books to their friends and on social media? The good news is there are subtle things you can do, things that are nearly invisible to the reader, that will make your stories unputdownable. The Beyond 10 Days course from Victory Editing can help you get the most from your stories and help you build that relationship with readers through your writing. This course is full of awesome, and best of all, you don't have to fly across the country or put on pants. In this course, we'll focus on avoiding info dumps, dialogue mechanics, show versus tell in dialogue, carrying show versus tell forward to your narrative, deepening your point of view and strengthening your protagonist's voice, overwriting and how to avoid it. 10 hours of video content with text and audio downloads. Shine that diamond. Join me at the Beyond 10 Days course. Go to hankgarner.com and click the banner to sign up today. Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. pub-site.com. the place to help authors find their home on the web. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have my friend Lori Rader-Day back on the show to talk about her brand new book, The Lucky One. If you guys remember about a year and a half ago when Lori was on and we were talking about her new book, Under a Dark Sky, if you love that book, you will love this one for completely different reasons and for all of the reasons that you love Lori's stories. And we'll explain all about that in a few minutes. So welcome back to the show, Lori.
Thanks for having me, Hank.
I'm excited to have you back. So it's been an exciting year and a half or so since the last book came out. How has Under a Dark Sky was your fourth book, and The Lucky One is your fifth one. Is that right?
It is. That's amazing. Those numbers
It
are
is.
crazy to me.
I know. Does it? Do you ever wake up and pinch yourself and say, "Well, I get to? They let me do this every day."
They work me pretty hard, but yeah, it's a lucky thing. And look at what I just did there. I feel pretty lucky to be able to do this kind of work. Yeah. It's been really a busy year. I did a ton of events for Under a Dark Sky. I'm planning the same sort of thing for the launch of The Lucky One. I like to get out there and talk to readers, so I keep myself pretty busy.
How fun. Last year, I remember us having a conversation at the beginning about you being one of those kids, and I was kind of one of those kids too, that just, kind of thought that books were magical and they just came from, some magical place. And then there was a kind of a moment of realization one day where you realized that people made books, and that if people made books, then Lori is a people, and Lori could make books.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Do you remember what book or series or author it was that turned you onto mysteries, and why that you fell in love with suspense and thriller and mystery stories?
I remember very well. So the author that made me realize that authors existed was Beverly Cleary. So I was about 7 years old when I realized that there were such things as writers who created these stories. But obviously she's still alive at 103, I believe, is not a suspense writer. One of my first favorites was Encyclopedia Brown.
My all-time childhood favorite.
I mean, they're awesome. I still remember some of the solutions,
I do too.
Up with. I also loved, there were a couple of Judy Blume books that were kind of, they wouldn't have been shelved in mystery, but they had mysteries in them, and I loved that. And then I got turned on to Lois Duncan pretty early. Do you know her? Do you know her work?
Vaguely, not really familiar, but I do know the name.
There were stories that were a little bit like there was always something kind of supernatural or definitely woo-woo stuff going on, but I loved them. I love them still desperately. So they were maybe the first real mysteries, full-length mysteries that I was reading. And then I kind of ran out of children's books because those were all in the children's section of my hometown library in Lebanon, Indiana. Shout out to Lebanon, Indiana Public Library. And the librarian, I think she was sort of fed up with me asking, for books to read, which one should I read? So she sent me upstairs to the adult section. And I was afraid of the adult section. That's where my mom was looking at books, and I knew I was no adult. I was only 11 or 12. So, I went up the stairs, but I thought they're going to kick me out. I don't want to go past that big, scary desk, and someone say, no, you have to go back downstairs, because then there was no library for me, right? I had been sent upstairs and now I was going to be sent downstairs. So I turned into the very first room before the desk, kind of slinked in there, and it was the mystery room. So I found Agatha Christie very quickly. I loved Agatha Christie as about, 12-year-old. And then I also found Mary Higgins Clark pretty soon. I must have just worked through, the C's. But I loved Mary Higgins Clark when I was about, I'm in the 7th grade and I'm carrying them on the school bus and telling my friends about them. There's no way I was old enough for those stories. But, I enjoyed them, and they led me directly to where I am today.
Oh, that's so fantastic. God love those librarians who, recognize that there's kind of a special kid and, kind of help you make those decisions that it's time to move up.
I was totally ready, and I just, I would never have done it on my own. But yeah, and that's why I think recently there's been some talk about finding librarians for letting kids read books out of their age range or something. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
In Missouri, and I just think, no, I mean, there is no such thing as age range. A kid will take in what they can take in, and maybe they won't get everything in a story, but it pulls them along in their journey as a reader, and we shouldn't, as adults, try to stamp that down.
Right. Absolutely. I know that you wrote, you studied journalism and you worked at other types of writing before becoming a novelist. When that first novel, started calling to you and bugging you, and it got to the point where you had to write this novel, did you know that it was going to be, a mystery story? Did you know that it would pull back to your roots like your writing career has done?
I kind of backed into almost every aspect of my career, Hank, to be honest. I'm very career focused now. I'm very ambitious now, but I think I sort of stumbled into everything. So I went into an MFA in creative writing program here in Chicago because I wanted to get serious about writing. I had been doing public relations mostly, not really journalism, but communications for my day job, but I hadn't been writing for myself in a really long time. So when I decided, I need to put up or shut up, I went into this writing program and started writing short stories, which was great. But one of my stories got long, and my workshop was sort of, they were giving me great feedback and saying, we want more of this and more of that and more of this character, more backstory. And it was already, 40 pages long. So I took it to I went to my teacher and I said, what am I supposed to do about all of this more stuff? It's already a beast of 40 pages. And she was like, yeah, that's a novel, Lori. You write more. You just keep writing. So I did that. But then when I started writing that story, it turns out that there was a crime story. There was a crime in it. But I had to be told by another crime writer who he read 15 pages for a thing that I got, a fellowship program that I got into. And I had been placed in the mystery group of this fellowship program. And I was confused by that. I had not been reading mystery in a long time, way back to the Mary Higgins Clark days, and not specifically mystery anyway. And it was Terrence Faraday, who's an Indianapolis crime writer, fantastic one. And he said, there's a crime in your first 15 pages. Are you going to solve it? If you solve it, it's probably a mystery. Maybe not, but, consider it. And so I backed into being a novelist, and then I backed into being a mystery novelist. So I don't know if you can say that any of my first novel called to me so much as, people with really more experience than I had pointed me in the right direction.
When he sort of laid that challenge out, or did you see it as a challenge? If this is a mystery, are you going to solve it? And did that get the gears turning? Or
it did. This fellowship program, it was part of the Midwest Writers Workshop, which still exists. The fellowship program doesn't, but it was like a 2-day kind of group and one-on-one program. It was really great, actually. And so in the group, he said, you might be writing a mystery, just, FYI, think about it. And then you were supposed to go and spend time alone revising. And in that time, I decided, okay, I'm going to look at this story as a crime story. What does that look like? And I rewrote the entire first 15 pages and then handed it in that night. And then the next morning, we met one-on-one, and he was really excited about, how I was able to see the story that he had seen, and it was already changing the story. He said something like, when you're nominated for an Edgar, just say thank you. Don't say, it's not a mystery. And I'm like, okay, what's an Edgar? I I was not in the community. I was not in, I wasn't involved. I didn't know a lot of mystery. He was my first mystery writing friend, so I had a lot to learn.
Wow. And you've since been nominated for an Edgar.
For Under a Dark Sky, actually. That's one of the exciting things that's happened in the last year and a half. Yeah.
So, and the Mary Higgins Clark Award. You won that.
Is, my heart. 4 of my 5 books have been nominated for that award, and I always love all the books in that category. I love reading them.
Absolutely. When when that experience happened, were you surprised that the story that started coming out was leaning that way? And later when you look back, did you think, well, of course that would be the kind of story I would write?
It's just hilarious that I didn't see it for myself, that I had to be told, because of course I loved crime stories and I loved suspenseful stories, and of course I did, and so many stories have mysteries in them, whether they are categorized as mysteries or not. It just shouldn't have been such a surprise to me, but it was. But as soon as he said it, I thought, oh, okay, now I know. I didn't know how to make this short story into a novel when my teacher had suggested it. And so I was sort of stuck, around 60 pages. And then once I knew it was a crime story, it was so much easier to figure out how to proceed. Even it ended up being a hot mess that I put in the drawer for 6 to 7 years before I rewrote it entirely and published it as The Day I Died in 2017, or 16. I'm starting to lose track of them, actually. But it gave me sort of like a map, not that every story is the same, but now that I knew, okay, this story is about solving that crime, and I can start to figure out how to do that.
When a new book starts coming to you, are you prompted, or what comes to you first? Is it a crime, a mystery that needs to be solved? Is it a character that then finds herself in precarious circumstances? What's the kernel of the story that usually grows into the thing?
I found that it's something different for every book. So far, it has been a different catalyst for each story, which, I don't know, maybe I'm doing things wrong. That the Black Hour was my first published book, and that was sort of a situation that I was thinking, what was that day like, the first day back for a professor who's been harmed by a student she didn't know, and then spends months, recuperating from her injury, and then comes back that first day of teaching. What is that day like? And then, who is that teacher? I knew that she would be female, but what does she teach? That all came much later. Little Pretty Things was a character. I was imagining, again, kind of a what if I had grown up in the place that I had grown up, but then had not gone to college. What would I have done for work? And I really, I thought I probably would have had to do something like cleaning hotels. Like I had no discernible skills until I went to college and got some, unless, anybody needed a yearbook put together. But, yearbook work is pretty thin on the ground if you don't have a college degree. For The Day I Died, it was, that short story was just, I went to the library and was looking sort of for inspiration, and I found a book about handwriting analysis. And I didn't know anything about handwriting analysis, but I checked the book out and read it, and then created this character who had that work. And then, of course, had to figure out how to write an entire novel about it, sort of backwards. Under Dark Sky was a location. I heard about the Dark Sky Parks and really just wanted to spend some time talking about, something nice for a change, because I had done, campus violence and sexual predators and kidnapping, and I thought, let's talk about some constellations or something. So that location was everything, and then who shows up to it? Why is she there? What is she bringing along, with her? What kind of baggage is she dragging behind her? For the lucky one, it was actually, I love to tell this story, so I'm just going to jump into it. So my neighbor, the house next door was kind of flipped, and then the cute family moved in next door. I met the mother and her daughter, it was about 2, in the backyard one day after they moved in, and she introduced herself and then said, "Oh, this is my daughter, Eden." And I was about to publish Under a Dark Sky, which had a character, the protagonist's name is Eden. And this little 2-year-old girl was now the only Eden I actually knew. And I thought, I have to tell her. I'm like, I'm so sorry I don't really start off this way, usually with people, but you should know that I'm a novelist and I have a novel coming out soon, and the character's name is Eden. And she thought that was the best. She was really excited about it. The mom was. And we started talking very soon about the fact that we share this really kind of terrible fence that's been there, for 80 years. It's a chain link fence, and it's just ugly. I don't like it, but it's theirs. And so we talked about how we both hated it. And she hated it, though, because she was worried that someone would lean over it and snatch her daughter, which was something I had not even considered.
But now you can't not think about it.
Well, right. And I'm usually like the bad case scenario person, right? That's my job. But I thought, well, I'm so surprised to hear you say that's why you hate that. I mean, that's crazy. But yeah, let's talk about this fence. But it's weird that I never would have thought of that. And she said, oh, that's because I was kidnapped as a child. Yeah. So I said, okay, stop. You might have
we need to talk about
become the protagonist of my next book. Is that okay? And she was like, yeah, that's cool. I'm like, she hasn't read any of my books, so she doesn't know, it's not good news if you end up in my book. So that's where that story started.
We haven't explored my weirdness yet. So.
Yeah. I mean, she knows it by now, but yeah.
Right. So funny. So you may become the protagonist of the new book, and then how do you start kind of letting your brain sink into this world where this happens? And the Lucky One is kind of a play on, it's not really a play on words, but we talk about a lot of child abductions end badly, and we've heard statistics on the news and things like that if a child goes missing, if they don't locate that child in really the first few hours, that each hour that goes by, the chances of retrieving a healthy, well child is it just goes exponentially lower with each hour that goes by. But when you do recover a child and she's okay, then she's the lucky one. Exactly. And so the title of this book is kind of a play on that concept.
Yeah. Alice Fine was kidnapped as a child, just like my neighbor was. But she was only gone for an afternoon. Pretty much that's the story my neighbor has too. She was located very quickly, and everything was fine. She's fine. She has 2 daughters now next door. We're friends. But Alice she's returned quickly. Her dad was a police officer, so she tracked her down. But the family's pretty shaken by this. So this is 30 years later. It's part of her life to sort of feel like she's the lucky one, and she's thinking about ways to, sort of be inspired by that and see what good she can do in the world. She's also a little bored at her job where she works with her dad and doesn't really get challenged very much. So she's volunteering with a website called the Doe Pages, which is it's based on the Doe Network, which is a real website where they have missing persons cold cases on one part of the site, and then unidentified remains cases on another side. And what they try to do is they try to match, with very small little details, some of these cold cases, because a lot, of course, these unidentified bodies are missing cases. They just are maybe missing from a different state and can't be matched. So it's a real website, and there are real amateur sleuths that do this kind of work. They're very serious about it. And so Alice is just a low-level volunteer for a site like that. But one day when she's on the site, she sees the face of her kidnapper, someone who was never brought to justice. And she decides, she's going to dig and find out what this person is up to and maybe finally get justice and make sure that he doesn't harm anyone else. And, of course, things are not what they seem. Otherwise, it would be a very short book.
Of course. What do you do to prepare yourself for a story like this?
Well, for this one, I did a little bit of research. I am not an online amateur sleuth, but I'm fascinated by this community. I read some books. I read one book in particular that I thought was really helpful by Deborah Halber called The Skeleton Crew. And it has at least about a third of the book is dedicated to the story of Todd Matthews, who solved the 30-year cold case called Tent Girl in Tennessee. And he's one of the guys who started the Doe Network, and he and I have become friends at this point. I interviewed him and read this book, read a couple of other books as well. And then I decided the best thing I could do is to try to figure out what's available if you decide to be someone who's interested in a, hometown kind of cold case like this. How do you go about researching it? And so I went to my hometown and I went to the library and dug through the microfilm of the local newspaper, trying to figure out what was published, what was not published, what was said, what was not said about a couple of cold cases, or one cold case that happened 9 houses away from my house when I was a kid, to somebody that I wouldn't say we were friends, but we knew each other. We were on the same school bus, and we had at least one conversation about our birthday parties. And then when she was 12, she went missing and has never been found.
Wow. Your books are kind of famous for the unique twists and turns that you take us on as we uncover the story. When you're writing a story like this, of course, like you said, many things happen or it'd be a very short book. When you're thinking through the story and you're thinking through this protagonist and, who your antagonist is going to be and, the thing that needs to be solved and the mystery that needs to be uncovered, how do you start thinking about the misdirections and the red herrings and, just the ways you're going to pull the rug out from under readers? Have you developed not a formula, that is a bad connotation, but do you kind of have a plan that you work through when you're working out the plot?
A plan, Hank? Were you listening earlier? I will say for the Lunky one, I actually did look ahead a lot more and plan a lot more than I ever have for any other book, because I had an idea of where I wanted to end up, and I wasn't sure how to get there. So I had to sort of do a little bit more planning than I would normally. Normally, I just, I start with the location, or I start with that character, or I start with that situation that I said before, and I just sort of explore it. I can't get started until I have about 3 or 4 points on the map. So for Under a Dark Sky, I had the location, but then I had to think, okay, who would wander into this, and what would her issue be? And then once I get, a couple of ideas, I can start with an opening scene and just go from there. For the Lucky one, it was different. I don't know if this means it's the new way I work. I can't guarantee that. Probably not. But it was a little bit different. So I'm trying to remember. The process was pretty tough. It was a tough thing to write. I worked really hard on this book, and I think it was because I kind of knew where I was going, and I kept saying, if I could land this story, if I could land this story, I think it might be maybe the best thing I've ever written. And I really wanted it to be the kind of story that a reader could really enjoy and enjoy those twists and turns. But I might do a little bit of noodling, what I call that is just get the notebook out and think, what could happen? What are the things that could happen? What about this story makes sense to have happen? But it was fun to write, mostly because of the volunteers from the Doe pages that I brought in. Alice is kind of, the real volunteers work on their own. They don't actually hang out together that much, from what I've heard. But I wanted them to have this little community, this little clique of nerds. And so I had them do a meetup, and writing Lillian and Juby was my favorite part of the entire book. And this is all character work, it's getting people in the same room or the same car and seeing how they interact.
That's so much fun when the characters come alive and you feel like you're, typing to keep up with them. That's always the best part, isn't it? That's
literally the thing we do this for, right? It's the slog, and until the words start to lift off the page, and it feels like you're taking dictation instead of, trying to figure out what's going on. I will say the other thing that I did differently for this book was it's in third person. Yeah. Which is, total insider baseball. Nobody cares about this, but, writer to writer, it's it was interesting to try to do that. It had been a while since I had tried to do third person. I had the first 4 books are all first person. It just felt like the natural way to tell those stories. For this one, I had 2 narrators, and they were very similar. They were young women of about the same age. They're about 4 years apart. They're both were in their early 30s, and I just didn't think they would sound very different if I told first person stories for both of them. In the Black Hour, I have 2 first person narrators, but they're very different people. One's about a 40-year-old woman, and one is a 20-year-old man. But in this case, it wouldn't have worked, I think, as a first person dual told story. So third person it was. But then, if you do that kind of thing, then you want to use what you've given yourself, the scope of the story, or the, being able to keep secrets a little bit. For the scope, I really wanted to get those Doe volunteers talking on their chat room boards, and that was fun to write.
Did you ever find yourself wanting to slip, over to first person? I'm writing a series right now, and it's in first person, and I find myself sometimes, wanting to slip out to, an omniscient narrator, and then I go, no, I can't do that. I can only, be through his eyes, and that's something, that I find myself backspacing and fixing. Or was this just a natural flow for you?
I will say it was more natural than I thought it would be. It was a little tough at first to get used to it. And I did slip out in first person a couple of times. I'm doing third close for each of the characters. So it's almost first person, really. So, I definitely did slip a couple of times. And then you just have to go back and read it carefully, of course. Or I'd noticed like 3 lines later and stop.
Do you ever have the opportunity to write short stories anymore?
I get the opportunity once in a while. The problem is I just haven't done it in so long. It's really weird. The muscle is almost atrophied in a weird way. I love short stories. It's just been a long time since I got to write a new one. The last 2 years I've had a story in an anthology. One was Unloaded 2, edited by Eric Beetner, and the second one was Murder a Go-Go's it was edited by Holly West. That was music and crime stories inspired by the music of the Go-Go's, which of course I had to be in. But
of course,
those are both short stories that I had written a while back and had never found the right home for. So I revised them and made sure that they were at least crimey enough to be in a crime story anthology. So I was really happy to find homes for, these 2 stories that I'd always liked and never found the right home for. I would love to get back into writing short stories.
It's really a weird thing, so many people begin writing short stories for lots of reasons. It feels more attainable, maybe. Mm-hmm. And there's Ray Bradbury famously, told us all to write lots of short stories until we get good at it, and lots of people give that advice. But you're absolutely right. When you kind of transition in your writing novels, it's kind of a completely different beast. And I'm thankful for those things I learned writing short fiction, but it's not always something you can reverse and go back.
I think it's for people who can do both and, swap back and forth between the two. I am in awe. I would love to, write more new stories. I find that I just don't know how to do it anymore. Maybe I just watch too much TV too. That might be the problem. In between novels, I take a lot of time off.
Yeah. You teach writing to a lot of folks and have done lots of workshops and things like that. Is there something that you see over and over that people all over the place struggle with? That if people could just correct this one thing, maybe it's a mindset thing, maybe it's some kind of common knowledge that's bogus that people believe. Do you see that there's one thing that plagues lots of people over and over again?
A couple of things. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was a kind of a craft thing, point of view, which we were talking about. The differences between third person and first aren't just he said, I said. It's an all-encompassing thing. I have a workshop that I do about point of view, where try to tell people all the ways in which, the point of view you choose means everything to the story. It's sort of a passion project. But that's not beginner stuff. Point of view is something that you can pick up after you've got some of the earlier things figured out. And what I see from earlier, really beginning writers is they keep going to these workshops and they keep taking classes and they keep buying all the writing books, which of course I did as well. I have all of them. Instead of just spending the time writing and maybe failing a little bit, writing a story that doesn't work and putting it aside, or writing a story that might work and then learning how to revise it, is they just keep taking in information without actually writing anything. It's like a procrastinating device, which again, I did it. I understand. But there's really no way to progress until you're actually writing words down and trying. It's all theoretical until you actually do it, and you just won't become the writer you want to be until it's like doing research. Like you can do as much research for a book as, there is time, but at some point you just have to set it aside and start writing the story and figure out what you don't know. And then you can research that. But you just have to write. And a lot of people think, no, I'm going to take this class. I'm going to study everything that anyone has to say to me. And you're not ready for some workshops until you've actually gotten some of the basic stuff down, which is writing.
Yeah. And that procrastination might manifest in collecting books about writing, trying every piece of software available for writing.
Oh, yeah.
We've all been through all of it. And yeah, sometimes you just have to write.
Right. Well, I sometimes do these workshops and people want to ask me about getting an agent. And I think, have you written any pages? They have 10 pages of a novel. It's not time to talk about that yet. Let's talk about, finishing something, learning how to revise your own work, how to be the best editor of your own work, which can be a long process, but that time is well spent. That time makes you a better writer and somebody who's got maybe some resilience and can last, the long haul, which is what writing is. Right.
Well, the lucky one is the new book. It's out everywhere today in hardcover, in Kindle edition, in audiobook. I love your audiobooks, by the way. That's one of my favorite ways to read these days. Mm-hmm. And so it's available in audiobook for those audiobook lovers out there.
I need to correct. It's actually a paperback. It's weird.
Oh, excuse me.
Because it's hardcover library edition.
The library edition.
This thing you're doing now, I don't know, but it's actually a paperback original, which I'm really happy about. I want to stay in paperback as long as I can.
I love paperbacks, especially the trade paperbacks, because they're great size and you don't have to mortgage your house to buy them.
It's the perfect size. And I can talk, somebody into a $15 book a lot more easily than a $25 book. So
heck yeah. Lori, tell everybody where they can find you online if they want to connect with you, dig into your back catalog and all that good stuff.
Sure. I'm at Lori Rader-Day, .com. I'm on Twitter at Lori Rader-Day. I'm on Instagram at Lori Rader-Day. I'm on Facebook at Lori Rader-Day Books. I'm not that hard to find, as it turns out.
Fun story before we go that I wanted to. I wrote a note to tell you about. About a month after we recorded last year, and we talked about your book Under a Dark Sky. About a month later, my family and I moved to a new house. And we're about 15 miles outside of the small town where we live, and we have no neighbors with any sort of outdoor lights or anything like that. So one of the first nights we moved in, it was late summer, and my wife and I sat in the yard, and when the sun had gone down and everything, it was completely black. And you could see the Milky Way with your naked eye.
Isn't it amazing?
There's no light pollution whatsoever. And I turned to Dawn, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is just like Lori's book that we just talked about." And then so it's kind of a running joke.
We'll go just like Lori's book.
Well, not just like it, but it's like the premise that Lori came up with, and we start talking about these places where you can go and I was like, well, we just go in our yard. We don't have to go to a park,
Amazing. Sometimes when I talk about that book, people are like, there's a park. And because they live in small towns and they can just go outside my hometown like that. But I live in Chicago where you can see about 2 stars. So people in Chicago get it.
It's kind of become a running family joke, that our yard is like Lori's book, and so
That's amazing.
we get
you have
it.
a dirt sky park for a yard. That's amazing.
That's right. So anyway, Lori, it's always fun to catch up. I love the new book, The Lucky One. Like we said, is out available everywhere today. Congratulations. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of it. Thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned now for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Fox's The Ember War.
The near future. Humanity's only hope of survival entered the solar system at nearly the speed of light. The probe slowed as the sun's heliosphere disrupted the graviton wave it rode in on from the abyss of deep space. Awakened by the sudden deceleration, the probe absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum utilized by its target species and assessed the technological sophistication of the sole sentient species on Earth. The probe adjusted its course to take it into the system's primary. If the humans couldn't survive, with its help, what was to come, then the probe would annihilate itself. There would be no trace of it for the enemy, and no chance of humanity's existence beyond the time it had until the enemy arrived. The probe analyzed filed patents, military expenditures, birth rates, mathematical advancement, and space exploration. The first assessment fell within the margin of error of survival and extinction for humanity. The probe's programming allowed for limited, autonomous decision-making, choice being a rare luxury for the probe's class of artificial intelligence. The probe found itself in a position to choose between ending its mission in the sun's fire and a mathematically improbable defense of humanity, and the potential compromise of its much larger mission. Given the rare opportunity to make its own decision, the probe opted to dither. In the week it took to pass into Jupiter's orbit, the probe took in more data. It scoured the internet for factors to add to the assessment, but the assessment remained the same. Unlikely, but possible. By the time it shot past Mars, the probe still hadn't made a decision. As the time to adjust course for Earth or continue into the sun approached, the probe conducted a final scan of cloud storage servers for any new information, and found something interesting. While the new information made only a negligible impact on the assessment, the probe adjusted course to Earth. It hadn't traveled all this way for nothing. In the desert south of Phoenix, Arizona, it landed with no more fanfare than a slight thump and a few startled cows. Then it broke into the local cell network and made a call. Mark Ibarra awoke to his phone ringing at max volume, playing a pop ditty that he hated with vehemence. He rolled off the mattress that lay on the floor and crawled on his hands and knees to where his cell was recharging. His roommate, who paid the majority of their rent and got to sleep on an actual bed, grumbled and let off a slew of slurred insults. Mark reached his cell and slapped at it until the offending music ended. He blinked sleep from his eyes and tried to focus on the caller's name on the screen. The only people who'd call at this ungodly hour were his family in Basque country, or maybe Jessica in his applied robotics course wanted a late-night study break. The name on the screen was Answer Me. He closed an eye and reread the name. It was way too early, or too late, depending on one's point of view, for this nonsense. He turned the ringer off and went back to bed. Sleep was about to claim him when the phone rang again, just as loudly as last time, but now with a disco anthem. "Seriously?" his roommate slurred. Mark declined the call and powered the phone off. He flopped back on his bed and curled into his blanket. To hell with my first class, he thought. Arizona State University had a lax attendance policy. one which he'd abused for nights like this. The cell erupted with big band music. Mark took his head out from beneath the covers and looked at his phone like it was a thing possessed. The phone vibrated so hard that it practically danced a jig on the floor, and the screen flashed "Answer Me" over and over again as music blared. "Dude," said his roommate, now sitting up in his bed. Mark swiped the phone off the charging cord, and the music stopped. The caller's name undulated with a rainbow of colors, and an arrow appeared on the screen, pointing to the button he had to press to answer the call. "When did I get this app?" he thought. Mark sighed and left the bedroom, meandering into the hallway bathroom with the grace of a zombie. The battered mattress he slept on played hell with his back and left him stiff every morning. Dropping his boxers, he took a seat on the toilet and answered the call, determined to return this caller's civility with some interesting background noise. "What?" he murmured. "Mark Ibarra. I need to see you." The voice was mechanical, asexual in its monotone. "Do you have any friggin' idea what time it is? Wait, who the hell is this?" "You must come to me immediately. We must discuss the mathematical proof you have stored in document title This Can't Be Right, Doc. Mark shot to his feet. The boxers around his ankles tripped him up, and he stumbled out of the bathroom and fell against the wall. His elbow punched a hole in the drywall, and the cell clattered to the floor. He scooped the phone back up and struggled to breathe as a sudden asthma attack came over him. How? He couldn't finish his question until he found his inhaler in the kitchen, mere steps away in the tiny apartment. He took a deep breath from the inhaler and felt the tightness leave his lungs. That someone knew of his proof was impossible. He'd finished it earlier that night and had encrypted it several times before loading it into a cloud file that shouldn't have been linked to him in any way. "How do you know about that?" he asked. "You must come to me immediately. There is little time. Look at your screen," the robotic voice said. His screen changed to a map program, displaying a pin in an open field just off the highway, connecting Phoenix to the suburb of Maricopa. "Come. Now." Mark grabbed his keys. An hour later, his jeans ripped from scaling a barbed wire fence, Mark was surrounded by desert scrub. The blue of the morning rose behind him, where his beat-up Honda waited on the side of the highway. With his cell to his ear, Mark stopped and looked around before deciding how to continue. Spiked ocotillo plants looked a lot like benign mesquite trees in the darkness. A Native American casino in the distance served as his North Star, helping him keep his bearings. "You're not out here, are you? I'm being punked, aren't I?" he asked the mysterious caller. "You are 9.26 meters to my east-southeast. Punk, decayed wood, used as tinder. Are you on fire?" the caller said. Mark rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time the caller had used the non-standard meanings of words during what passed as conversation between the two. Mark had tried to get the caller to explain how he knew about his theorem and why they had to meet in the middle of the desert. The caller had refused to say anything. He would only reiterate that Mark had to come quickly to see him, chiding him every time Mark deviated from the provided driving directions. "If you're so close, why can't I see you?" he asked. He took a few steps in what he thought was a northwesterly direction and squished into a cow patty.